Hi, everyone. My name is İpek Yeğinsü. I'm an independent curator from Istanbul, Turkey. And today our guest for 212 Photography Festival is Felix R. Hi, Felix.
Hello, how are you?
Fine. How about you?
Very good. Thank you. Very good. Very good. Thank you for inviting me.
We are excited to have you here in Istanbul also with your works in the festival. I just want to make a brief introduction to who Felix R. is, and then we'll be talking about your work in more detail and your journey as an artist and how it kind of evolved from different geographies, different times, and I hope it will be a pleasant journey for everyone. So Felix was born in 1976 in Madrid. He received a certificate from the International Center of Photography and then did an MFA in photography in Yale University School of Art. And he is both a photography and painting artist. He lives in Ibiza, Madrid, and Brooklyn. So, Felix, I would like to start with the subject of your works in general, which is mostly focused on the other. And this other can be in ethnic terms, cultural terms, or sexual terms, you name it. And you also personally have a similar experience. You moved from Spain to the USA to study at the university, and it became your new additional home. And what was your experience initially like as a migrant and artist from Spain?
Okay, so my history more than my career is actually not quite orthodox. Actually, it's very unorthodox. Actually, I didn't move to New York to go to university. First of all, I dropped high school when I was very young.
Oh, so that was an earlier situation. Okay.
Yes. Then I picked high school. That was years later before I go to New York. Anyway, it's a long story. I'm not going to bore you. The important thing is that I moved to New York. Yes, already convinced that I wanted to follow the arts as a career and became a better artist. And I was already very focused on photography. That I studied here in Spain. I was older, but I went back to school and studied art and photography here. And I learned that every artist that I was being influenced by had some kind of relationship with New York, which of course, that's like the impact of American photography in the decades before. So then I moved there just to see how possible that could be. I come from a working class family. I didn't have money or experience of traveling or anything like that. And I got accepted in the ICP program, and with some help here and there, I went to New York with the excuse that I could study and have a visa and everything. Things went very well. I finished and they gave me a visa and I started working, assisting and doing whatever I could to survive. And I got married with an European woman also. And things got more like time passed by and I kept getting deeper and deeper into being in New York. New York could be very difficult. I'm from Europe.
Very competitive also, right?
Yes, extremely competitive. I mean, especially I'm from Spain, from the 76, as you said, like the world, like the new European Spain is a very comfortable place to live and to so it was very challenging in that aspect, but I'm very energetic actor. I was very young and I was very ambitious. And what it also has is full of more, of course, like everyone knows that this is the most creative place in many aspects. But I always say one thing about New York for those that, of course, now this is 25 years ago. Now things are very different. But New York is also the only place I lived that when you arrive, you think you connect with the place immediately because it's been so injected in our everyday life culturally with the media, the TV, the years, the movies. But then it's the only place that more you are and longer you stay, less you know the place, and more alienated you feel.
That's a curious thing that you're saying. I mean, maybe we have such a solid stereotype of the place that it kind of starts, that myth starts to dissolve, starts to collapse once you go there and actually experience that.
Of course, which of course, in my case, what happened is I end up literally achieving all the dreams that I had and beyond. I'm just talking about experiences. Like I end up becoming friends with some of my idols, let's say, like Philip Lorca di Corsia was one of the photographers that I went to. Philip and PL and I end up having, a friendly relationship and et cetera, et cetera. I traveled the world with photography, it gave me a lot, it's very hard, but, this is what this kind of, post-capitalist eccentric places have. And truth is, you get tired of the fish, being European, it make you old, very quick. But anyway, yes, so that was my experience in that. And I was fully based there for 18 years. So that's a lot of time,
Definitely. And you came into contact with many different cultural communities, probably.
Yeah, definitely. It's a very enriching place. You definitely, what you experience in New York, of course, then I live also in New Haven and 2 years in other parts of America. I travel, it's not the same. New York City is an island it's a cultural island. That's also true. It's all about learning and experiences, but, it's, that has a price to pay,
Definitely. And when I look at your work, it's so obvious that you're interested in daily life, everyday people, ordinary people, and their stories, rather than these like monumental scenes or landscapes or these poetic figures, etc. You seem like you are after what's daily, ordinary, and trivial, basically. And how about this side of your work? Like when I think about your earlier photographs, they have a more documentary style, and they actually remind me of Kudelka's or Cartier-Bresson's more like aesthetic poetry. But then, as time goes by, the quote-unquote brutal naturalism in your photographs gets even more pronounced. You sometimes use these very difficult, even revolting angles that no one would prefer. Artistically, or supposedly erotic but hardly so sometimes, and collapsing buildings, old structures. What are you trying to do with this?
Okay, I think maybe what you are to begin there, because that probably is gonna be the most extent, because that's very interesting and complex. I mean, it's very simple but very complex answer, could become a very complex answer. Mm-hmm. So I think that, first of all, in a matter of my evolution, I was always interested in the documental aspects of photography because it's in the nature of the media. But in my early photographs, actually, before the 2010, I think I was actually more, which is funny of how things turn out now, but I was more interested actually on the links that were between photography and painting than any aspects of the document. And I was actually, once I was first influenced by the very big, Cartier-Bresson is one of them, and the classic. Even Nan Golding was for me like a major, going backward, major influence, and actually probably the first real like waking up in a matter of, I can do that too, referring to an experience. But then again, I was more, I'm from Spain. I mean, I didn't have the Museum of Modern Art next to me. I had El Prado, and the latest idol was Picasso. It wasn't, Gregory Crewdson. What I'm trying to say? It was painting was, this photography was very small in Spain. So I guess your brain was educated. My brain was educated that context anyway. So my interest, as soon as I pick up a camera, was for something else, but it went fast there. But I mean, I felt that in that years, everybody was also kind of interested on that after the American photographs and, after Gary Winogrand and all of that, if you think of like Jeff Wall or like Thomas Struve, all these other artists and European, like the Düsseldorf school. Yeah. I think everybody kind of turned into giving that privilege to photography that seems that photography couldn't achieve by itself in the art gallery. And that influenced me or make a big reaction to me too. But anyway, then I think it became more, after 10 years in New York, let's say between the 2010 to 2015. I think probably those are the period that of those photographs that you are more talking right now. I would assume, and I think that there is a big there's two aspects. I was already 10 years in New York City. I had already been studying in the ICP, which is an American school, of course, and I was already graduated from Yale and in photography too. So the influence of the American photography and the street photography in that context, especially, the street photographer, and from that, like Walker Evans, Robert Frank, Gary Winogrand, Philip Garcia, Todd Papa George, all that was a massive influence, and it was, slowly more and more getting into my practice, logically. And it was a very also important part, which I think is gonna probably we'll talk more about later, that I was then shooting with the large format camera, for many years, because I was obsessed with the way that it was depicting the world. I found it like hyperbolic and magical, but it was slow, it was expensive. And in that years also I switched to, like most of us, I switched to digital. And then I became liberated, I became free. And that technical aspect, of course, photography is an industrial, it's a technique, it's directly related to technology. So whatever you use, it really influences your work, right? Anyway, so I became more free, and I started to understand the medium differently. And I think that changed the world. And probably the idea of documentary or relationship with those other photographers, especially using a smaller and faster camera, would be fair to say, it's the first thing. So they got away from that canonical form that I used to have,
Exactly. And maybe there's more spontaneity also when you have a smaller camera. It's less intimidating for your subjects, etc. So it kind of contributes to the spontaneous texture in your pictures.
To me, also, the thing is they became more unfinished and unsettling because I didn't have to worry about how much I shoot, so I would shoot it all. And even that, this Gary Winogrand, I think it was asked once, referring like, how many pictures do you shoot in order to have one good picture? And then he said, well, I'm not an industrial production company here. That this is not about that, but it is true that this gives the practice a constant learning and anticipation that photography, in my opinion, is unique about, and using other work, or other artists working in other ways, which is absolutely great. And of course, and everything has, but I found that being one of the most interesting parts of photography. And those years were important with me making that switch. And you react quickly and push in certain directions and everything. But when we talk about the ugly and revolting, as you said, my favorite artists have always had an edge when it comes to describe beauty and intelligence, right? And I don't think that create a world in general based on an army of people having the same concepts of beauty, looking alike or projecting the world in certain direction is the way that we can just understand beauty. I think beauty is everywhere, and even in pain and distress. And I think it's actually more difficult when you find it in those moments, and much more interesting and fulfilling than when you find beauty just on the surface of things, which is more accessible. So I don't know if that's answered your question.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, also when your work kind of speaks to the viewer this way, it also is like an implicit kind of challenge against the established norms in art. Many avant-garde artists have already been challenging those topics and issues, but still, I mean, that struggle never finishes, especially now that we have the NFTs, for instance, a new form of ownership, like disciplining the digital imagery in ownership terms. We will need a new tool to overthrow that kind of like capitalist bourgeois structure. And I think photography is able to provide us with a lot of tools in our hands. Something I'm really curious about is how do you go about taking a picture? Like, how do you interact with your subjects? Do you interact with them before you take the picture, or do you just come into the scene randomly, or are any of these works staged? Some of them obviously are, but some really give me this feeling that they might or might not be controlled. So how does that process work for you?
Okay. So first I'm going to say that I think you meant how do I go about making a picture and not taking a picture?
Yeah, exactly.
I think that answered the question already, or maybe not. Let me explain. So that was a joke, but
I love that. One letter makes a huge difference. Huge ideological difference. Definitely.
But well, then I would say that because I've been asked that question a few times, and I think it's obvious because the work, and I hope it does, it creates, especially because of photography, has had that constant two parts or two themes for many years about, the importance of that, no? And it's been like a fight apparently for many years. I never understood why, but I understand that is it. And what I would say is that actually with the years I work in so many different ways, but I have to say that when I felt more satisfied with the results, when I have interacted with the subjects but they didn't know.
That's great.
And that's a way to say it. Let's put it that way.
Mm-hmm. So you kind of prepared them for the image, but they weren't aware of that.
No. I didn't mean that. I wanted to leave it there. Maybe it's more interesting for the.
Okay.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. You keep the mystery.
Maybe it lose the. It will lose maybe some strength. Mm-hmm. But it's. I just mean that it's that in a way you are always, if you especially photograph humans, mm-hmm. you always have to interact with the subjects. I mean, even if you are with a tele zoom 2 kilometers away, there is always an interaction, and there is, and I think that the photograph, the strength of the photograph, an artist has the practice of every artist is different, and they have their ways, and you go about the way. But again, I think is when you lose that, when you can't ask that question, when you don't care about, when the photographer became invisible in a way because you don't know where the relationship has been created with the subject. I think that's a good thing I think it's a good result. I think that means maybe a good photograph is in front of you.
Yeah, and some amount of mystery is definitely good, because sometimes I think, especially in conceptual art, we exaggerate the explanation part. We almost give the user's guide to the work, and rather than looking at the piece, looking at the work, people just read some texts and kind of, almost graduate from that text and then receive the work. But sure. I think this element of mystery, this uncertainty is still something we should continue to cherish. And that's what makes art so rich, in my opinion. Mm-hmm. And something else that I noticed when I looked at your works, your work turns from the more like micro situations, from the micro like lives into more macro issues like parades, crowds, maybe protests, as if your individuals kind of gather at the end and decide to act almost. If you look at your photographs as a whole story, if you read them as a book in a way, it's like from these individual stories, you build up towards a social statement. What would you like to say about that?
Okay, so this has to do with, to start some place, this has to do with the conversation we had a few minutes ago about the cameras, actually. Working for a few years with certain big machine, very slow, and then all of a sudden, of course, that's one aspect of why I decided to do all these things, which we don't have time here to go. But So, but that changed, that momentum in which all of a sudden digital photographs are free, meaning, compared with before, you have to develop the film, you have to print it, and now you didn't have to, you have a computer. Once you make the investment, you have it forever. And so I couldn't stop shooting, and all this curiosity and all these interactions and all this, as we call them, micro moments, which is interesting. I wanted more and more and more of them. And then having experienced that way of working and accumulating all this image, and because of the amount of energy that I have, and I realized that I probably was able to have all of these in one single frame, Originally, my obsession was, what if I don't have to edit the work? What if that doesn't have to be in a still image, which of course it always will be, but what if that gets to a relationship with, let's say, film, where you have thousands of photograms that, because they move behind of a light, they get animated. But in this case, they don't get animated, but they just get still in front of you. How could that be possible? It's a matter of a challenge. I was still finishing school. So, don't you have this experimenting year? And then I came up with that. I was fascinated with a lot of the work that I was doing, and I was very interested, and I couldn't tell the whole story with just a few pictures, edit them in a old school way, So I started working in the computer and putting them together. I, as I said, was always very interested in painting, and I've been always, parallel thinking about that aspect. So, I think the fact that the pictures end up all together and created this unique form, which is more related as a first sight to a painting than to a photograph. Until you don't get close, you almost cannot even know what you're really looking at. Sometimes it becomes an abstract image.
Especially in the Sword of Damocles, for instance.
Yes.
Those works also remind me a little bit of Andreas Gursky's works. And as you said, it's more like an abstract composition when you look at it from a distance.
Mm-hmm.
And when you go inside, it's much more intriguing, and there's a lot going on there. So I think social issues are like that too. I mean, when you look at them from a distance, you have this kind of abstract, theoretical understanding of things. But when you get closer to what's going on in the at the individual or let's say smaller level, you start seeing more like variety of stories, a variety of issues, and you get to really feel empathy towards people and towards this phenomenon that you try to theorize in more abstract terms. So it's a bit like collecting data and still not forgetting that data comes from actual people, in a sense.
Well, it's interesting of what you say is because I was working in that way, and I kind of that, let's just say, strategy, to call it that way, this form, and I was fascinated and I like it, and I felt comfortable, and it felt so me at the time. It was very hard work, of course, and huge coordinations of going, coming back, always alone in the computer, many hours. But I liked it and I enjoy every aspect of it, and you can tell that in the pictures later. But anyway, then I realized, the 16 happened, and Trump happened. With again, I did a project before called X, which it was only about electronic music venues. That it does in a way has a lot to do with this. But then I found I didn't want to repeat myself because I don't work that way. Every project is always different, to be honest. But I felt exactly what you said. It was very interesting. It was all this new era of the fake news and what look like in a moment and what real things or how things are really happening, especially in the individual aspect of it. So I thought that was a good way to work with those events, and to use those events for the concept of my work. It was a parallelism between content and form that I thought, and the momentum too. It was unique, and so I found it interesting. In order to be honest, I don't want to sound, I'm not a sociopolitical artist, but it really. I use that to the advantage of the concept of my work, not the other way around. Or that's how I feel about it, So yeah, I think what you're saying is I totally see that,
And when you say you kind of are interested in fake news and this misinformation, let's say pandemic, I also think about your videos, all these images pouring onto us at such a fast speed, like we're trying to perceive it and it just slips away. And it's like an overdose of imagery, which is exactly the time we live in. And I kind of find it really interesting that you use the medium of video and photography in such a like vague relationship. Like that work can be regarded as photography and video, and none of the above also. How about your like creative process with the video?
I did a few videos. All the works I've done, we're gonna talk about that later, right? But all the work and all the mediums, let's say, that I used, it's been just because of that time of my life. For whatever reason, I've been interested on that. I was learning about it, and then I wanted to get deeper in it. But it's not that. That's how it works. I'm saying there is no much more complication concept behind it for me. Now, specifically the videos you are talking about, there is one especially that's called hyperbole, actually. And I have to say, it's the one of my favorite pieces of all times. I really like that work, and I like it because it has this relationship with the photographs that I was doing. As I said, this is not, again, a moving image as such, because it's made out of still images, and it doesn't have a straight relationship of one image to another. But it is a moving image, you know. I mean, it became this broken. It was some kind of like, I don't know how, you know, when you open a frog, this section or this, you know, like when you go to the lab and open the frog, you know, I was trying to kind of
experimental,
take photography and what it was happening. You know, it was the first time where like you buy a camera, because that's already like 12 years ago. It's kind of crazy when I made those videos, and you know, you could buy the camera, the 5D, and now it's normal, but it was camera and you also had a video. You could make video in it, you know. So for photographers, it was fascinating. All of a sudden, everybody started making videos because they could, you know. And so did I. I didn't use that tool. I just found, which I did sometimes, by the way, I did other videos that are completely much more, let's say, cinematographic. But yeah, I was just curious about how. I guess my obsession was very simple, and I should stay with that, which is what I would say. And I am interested on drama, and as much drama as I could have in a frame, the best for me. So of course, those were very good ways for me to come across that. You know, if I could have, I don't know if it was 100,000 photographs in that video, you know, it was quite, doesn't matter. That many in one, fine. Of course, it won't get to you as a traditional way. You won't experience it the same way. But you know, we don't experience the world the same way now that in the 20s or in the 90s or in the 30s. So I felt those kind of hyperbolic, again, I keep using that word, but exaggeration and over the top, like. Yeah,
but I feel like it's also a metaphor of our general experience, everyday experience now.
I'm also pretty much like that by nature, and I also was living in New York City, and so you know, I felt, you know, when I look at all those works, they don't feel accelerated to me anymore, you know. And when I did. They did, you know, actually people would leave the room, you know, because it was too much, you know, and I don't think nobody would leave the room anymore. Let's put it that way, because we were used to it.
In some exhibitions, they have these warnings, like if you have epilepsy, don't enter. And this is that kind of work.
You have to, I had to have those signs, for these videos.
And right now we are surrounded by an epileptic apparatus, we can say.
Absolutely.
Of course, above all, you are a painter. We should definitely talk about your relationship with painting, and your work there is really different from your work in photography and video. And you also do sculpture, and you also use these more like quote unquote traditional media. In your paintings, you have this more like street art style, more like expressionist style. How do you decide on which medium you want to use? Or do you have like these phases in your life when you say, okay, I just want to, dive in my paints and, I just close myself into my studio and paint and use a brush? Or in this phase of my life, I want to go out there and make pictures, photographs. How does that work for you?
Okay, it's very simple. I mean, it's very complicated in a way of how it's not many. I guess every artist is different, and I am. But it's not, again, as it was my education. It's not what most people, especially in the last decades, where every artist seems to have the need to find a strategy and have an identity. So such a big word all this decade. I keep getting my followers, let's say, or even my collectors, crazy. Because of course. Couple of years I'm here and there, and in a way, in the beginning, I thought that was a problem. It was a problem in order to get an audience and to even feel with yourself that you know what you're doing and everything. But this is who you are, and I started taking that as an advantage for me, and I think about it in the long run, and I think about it with the years, and I feel that there is no way to stop that. So even though I do believe that I get older, and for example, okay, let me just stop here and go back to answer your question much easier. Yeah. It's very chronologically. I mean, when I was younger, I was interested in. I'm a visual artist. I don't think I'm a multidisciplinary artist, so I wouldn't call myself like that. I have learned from many years. I've been very interested in photography for many years for specific reasons that always led to the obsession or the ambition of creating a good image, a good picture, and whatever that means and however that means, according to my evolution and my experience and my personality, that has been constantly evolving. So I right now haven't taken a picture in like a few years, not a single picture. I haven't taken a camera it's been like 4 or 5 years, and I only paint, and I did a few sculptures, that's true, these years too. But this is for a very personal issue. Situation. I mean, at some point, I couldn't have access to the technology that I was using for very personal matters, and something happened that made me come more to Spain. In Spain, I didn't have my studio as I had it in there. The environment is different. The experiences that I was having around were different. I started painting. It was a much more, because I can't be still, I have to be creating something. And painting was the practically talking, it was what I could do best in the situation that I was. And that situation lasted a couple of years. And in that couple of years, I got deeper and deeper and deeper in it, even though it's something that I always been doing somehow, even with photographs, I'm saying, because we talk about, and because of the festival project and all of this, but there is many other bodies of work of my art that let's just say the figure and the reality, the wall out there get more confusing in the result, so they became more pictorial. It was evolving toward that, and now painting is something very, of course, very expressive, and it's a lot of expressionism in the work because it's all about that. I have a piece of land here in Ibiza and another one in Madrid that I don't have water or electricity, that I go there, I call it El Campo, and it's pretty organic and it's going back to their roots, and I love it, and I really react to it good, and whatever comes of it. And just to end all that years until the last project, which is where you are showing in the festival, in the Trump race and all of this, at that point, I also became, all this interest for people that you have noticed in my work, and that is true. We've been there, and for the others, I'm not going to say vanished, but I was starting to be a little less interested.
I think it's still there, but in a different way.
Yeah,
Like,
you're right. You're right. But maybe
it's
the paintings, I'm saying I probably was selfishly and at the time being more interested in myself or what is inside of me than what it was around me. And somehow, because of course it's always the same. And I think maybe this is, if you want to take it to a concept, maybe that's not something there. But seriously, it's been a very practical thing. It's been a switch. A shift, sorry, that happened because of a very things related with my personal life and then reacting to that. That's pretty much it.
Mostly your paintings are mostly part of a self-healing process also. That's how I feel about them. But still, absolutely. When you look at them without, considering you as a subject, I immediately think of the graffiti, street art, child paintings. So all this like spontaneous, everyday life things, undisciplined, and they still relate to your photographs, actually.
I'm very glad you see that. I see it clearly, of course, but I know it's hard for others probably make this link. You gotta study the work, and yeah, I agree with you. Especially, I mean, it was like I was doing that when I was a child, because I was a graffiti artist when I was very young and a skater, all that you can be, and I had a band, and all of these things, and then it was like, okay, stop and go to New York and start photograph, do an intellectual and academic and that. And it was if all of a sudden you copy and paste and you brought me back to before I left, or something like that. Like it was something unfinished probably that I had to go before I keep moving. I don't know.
But maybe visiting that part of your life, that period of your life through art helped you maybe also in your healing process, because sometimes that really triggers some memories, using the same that you used to use when you were young. That might be really very therapeutic, I think.
Absolutely. Also, it's all very logic when you really go into it. But like I was in a city with 12 million people, and then all of a sudden I came to Ibiza and I spent here the winters, which I know Ibiza is so, but it's really very little people. It's like 40,000 people. And Formentera, which I spent most of the time, it's actually nobody, So you spend, and I was alone, I was surrounded with a very quiet environment, and that influenced also what I'm doing and whatever I was focusing on. Yeah. And I'm very pleased, to be honest. I'm very, now things are very well with the paintings in a matter of it's actually functioning, in an international level. I'm working with the gallery in 3 different parts of the world, and I still can paint here and have my life as I want it, and don't feel that anything that I've done has not been to get here or part of this, as you just said. I had it so clear, but of course, when you see one painting and you see some of the photographs of 2012 or 2013 or even 2016, you gotta talk to these people for them to know what they're watching, but yeah.
And I think also when you are situated in a quiet place with a little distraction, your inner voice is heard more loudly.
Of course.
And that's so reflected in your work. One can tell that there was some introspection going on there. And while you were in New York, you were much more extroverted, because you are surrounded with all these stimuli.
And
distraction, urban chaos, and that's definitely reflected in your work. Thank you very much. It was such a pleasant conversation. It was great to get to know you better, thanks to this occasion. So Felix's works will be on view as part of the 212 Photography Festival in Istanbul at Bomontiada from October 6th to October 16th. You are all welcome. Thanks again, Felix. Wish you all the best.
Very much. Thank you. And I hope to see you there.
Definitely.